This is another one of the ICEAA Tech Showcase webinars. Today we're joined by Mrs. Melissa Cyrilliuk from ACEIT, presenting on the challenges with using spreadsheets for cost analysis and why ACE is the superior option. ACEIT is one of the exhibitors at our conference next week in Portland. So those of you who are going to be at the conference, you can definitely stop by and talk to some folks about ACEIT and what they got going on over there. So everyone on the call today, please, if you have questions, use the questions text box. What we're going to do is hold the questions until the end, and then I will unmute the askers individually so they can ask their questions to Melissa. She's going to present until about 12:45, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. So I guess with that, I'm going to pass it on over.
All right. First of all, I would like to thank ICEAA for hosting all of the tech tools that are at the booth next week. I will be at the ACEIT booth that Megan talked about. So if you have any questions about the presentation that I'm about to give, or just would like to talk about ACEIT in general, I will be there. And then finally, I would like to thank all of you for taking your time today to join us to hear this presentation. So with that, I will get started. So I have been a ACEIT instructor for most of my 20-year career, and I often get asked the question, why should I learn ACE if I already know Excel? And the best analogy I can come up with is if you had a research paper that you are putting together or study, and you have, in that report, you have lots of tables and figures and charts, and you put in references and footnotes, and you've got a table of context and numbering throughout section numbering throughout the report. Would you do that with a typewriter, or would you go and do that with a tool that has some automation in it, like a word processor, or in today's standard, a laptop to kind of put that report together? And the answer, I think most of people would agree with, is that you would go and use the tool that's got all the automation and the tailoring in it to allow you to put together the best report that you can, free of as many errors as possible, and in the most efficient amount of time. And that's what I think ACE is really about, especially when compared to a spreadsheet. So this particular presentation, I spent a great deal of time over the last year looking at this subject. What we really want to do is provide analysts with the ability to put together a high-quality estimate in a timely manner, so that they can provide it so that the decision maker can take action on it if they need to. So the problem with spreadsheets is that it takes a little bit longer, and there's more steps to build and maintain the cost estimate and analysis. You've also, they're kind of prone to inaccuracies. There's no error checking that's there. Sometimes you end up having to oversimplify a solution to something because of the spreadsheet mechanics that you need to go through in order to make something happen, when you really want to model a particular method. And then working and managing with what-if drills becomes a little bit difficult. So ACE, it's been developed specifically for government cost estimating, to support both the cost estimation and the analysis projects. So this particular presentation, what I'm going to do is explore the differences. Now, in 45 minutes, I can't talk about all of the differences between the two tools. So what I'm going to do is talk about some of them, and then I will show you where you can learn about even more of them beyond this presentation. So with ACE's design is really focused on providing you, letting the tool do the mechanics of the estimate for you so that you can focus your time and your effort on the estimating methods that you're looking at. So what we want to help you do is focus your time and effort where it's going to allow you to make the highest quality estimate. I've done a lot of rehosting of ACE or of spreadsheets into ACE over the years of my career, and just about every one of those, actually not just about, all of those efforts that I've done, I've always uncovered a lot of mistakes in the spreadsheet model, and it's things like equations are linked to the wrong cell. You've got summation equations that are trying to sum up a work breakdown structure, and there's a mistake or a missing element somewhere, and then that doesn't ripple to other places in the estimate. You've got inflation calculations that might be linked to the wrong inflation factor out of a table. And then if you have to go and change the estimate, it becomes, you have to make sure that you go and change. Usually you have to change things in more than one place, and you have to remember all the places that you need to go and change it. And I could go, on and on with this list. So what I really want to focus on here is that I know that people say that, I want to use Excel because I have more freedom to control what I need to do in the estimate. And I'd just like to submit to you that just remember that with great freedom comes great responsibility, and you have to be able to always be 100% consistent with what you're doing. Make sure you don't make all these errors. With ACE, somebody that's trained in ACE can go and build that estimate in a fraction of a time that it's going to take to do that in a spreadsheet, and because ACE helps you along with some of the structure and the error log, you're going to make less mistakes. And I think that's probably the most important takeaway that management would like to hear, or reviewers would like to hear. So I talked a little bit about the ACE, the concept. I think it's pretty simple. We try and automate the mechanics of building the estimate so that the analysts can focus their limited time on collecting data, analyzing that data, building up some sort of estimating method, the best possible one that they can come up with for all the elements in their project. Our ACEIT team is basically made up of cost estimators and analysts. We have designed the tool because we know what a cost analyst, what a cost estimator needs, because we've done that job for many, many years. We take all of our lessons learned, we've put that into the design of the tool. We make sure that we're testing with all of those scenarios in mind. And then we are, when you call into the help desk, we have somebody that's familiar with cost estimation and analysis to be able to talk with you to help you through working with the tool. So for purposes of this particular study, what I've done is, I think the easiest way for people to really understand the difference between spreadsheets and ACE is if you start to visualize a side-by-side example. So what I've done is I've built the same exact estimate in both Excel, the spreadsheet tool that we're using, and ACE. And the slides that I'm going to show are going to start to show those two tools side by side. This presentation that I'm giving today is actually an executive summary of a much larger study that we did. The study and all the example files, both the Excel file and the ACE file, are available on ACEIT.com. I will show in a little bit later how exactly you can get that information off our website. So for purposes of today, what I've done is, for the 5 main sections that I talk about in the larger presentation, I'm going to focus on a couple elements from each of these sections. The basic estimate structure, basic estimate calculations, a little bit on complex estimating problems, I'll talk about a bit about adding a WBS element to the estimate and how that differs in both tools, and then we'll talk a little bit about what-if drills. If you're familiar with ACE at all, you probably know that ACE has an embedded uncertainty tool within the tool, so it's not an add-on to a tool. The uncertainty analysis is actually embedded in the tool. I think this is a known benefit of ACE, and for purposes of the study that larger study and for today, I'm going to focus on other things because I think that my colleagues have done a very good job over the years of explaining the ACE particular things. So before I start to go into the actual comparison, I'll just take a second here to explain the little estimate that we put together. I used a power generation plant as the example. There is the main work breakdown structure for this particular example project is about 37, it's exactly 37 rows long. It encompasses an R&D, a procurement, and an O&M section so that we can exemplify some of the differences in those different phases. And then we start to look at the estimating methods for the lowest children within this work breakdown structure. We have examples of engineering buildup, parametric equations, learning curves, factor methods, so a factor of another element, throughputs, and then looking at taking units into development, then doing a procurement of units, and then fielding those units in the field for a certain number of years. And I used 10 years as the default service life. So that's just to give you a flavor of the kind of example that we looked at, and the ACE model, it has this exact work breakdown structure in it, as does the Excel file. So to actually go and compare, what I wanted to do is, and what you're going to see here, this presentation, it's not a bullet list of the benefits of ACE. What I've tried to do is provide an illustrative example of where you can see what the Excel setup would be, and then how something looks in ACE. And I talk about some of the challenges that you'll have in the Excel estimate, and then how ACE mitigates those challenges. So most of in the actual full presentation, there'll be slides for the Excel and the ACE, so you can see them in a large screen. Okay, so let's begin with the basic structure of the estimate. You know, these are the things that I'll call the not so sexy things, but they're really the foundation of the estimate. These are also the places where, when you do that rehost of the spreadsheet estimate in Excel, this is where we find most of the errors. They're in places where we're trying to link cells together, and those links don't always happen perfectly. But the thing to note here is, if the structure is not standardized in the estimate, then I think the estimate in Excel, when you have a large program in particular, it starts to become unmanageable when you start to have to deal with things like changes to the work breakdown structure, adding more years to the time phasing of the estimate. So on the next few slides, I'm going to illustrate a couple of things along the WBS, the basic inflation, and the estimate layout. Okay, so let's talk about estimate layout first. So the first thing that I think is important is, when you're starting to go and create a brand new estimate, what's the difference between that in Excel and in ACE? In Excel, you've got to, because it's a free-form spreadsheet, you have to start with laying out how you're going to set up the model. Now, with this particular example, what I've done is I have the main work breakdown structure as the first tab in the workbook. where I'm putting together the full work breakdown structure in base year dollars. Then I take a copy of that so that I can see the estimate, again, the full work breakdown structure in then year dollars, so I get that budget dollar that I need to provide to my decision maker. I've got a couple of summary charts in here, and then I have for each lowest children in the work breakdown structure, so all the elements, I have a spreadsheet or a worksheet for each one of the WBS elements. So, and I've done it in a fairly logical fashion. Each of the inputs is laid out exactly the same. But you end up with a workbook, especially here where I'm talking about an estimate that's got about 25 lowest children in it. You end up with a workbook that's got 25, 30 plus worksheets in it. So I've got to build all that before I can even start to begin to think about, what really should my WBS elements be? What are my inputs? How many years do I have in the estimate? And how do I want to go about getting all the data that I'm going to need into the estimate? So I got to do all that layout stuff first. From ACE, when you go in, because there is a little bit of structure for you to work with, what you're really doing is you start right away with WBS definition, inputting variables, and then going into each of the lowest children in the work breakdown structure and starting to build out the methodology. So I've immediately got a time savings here when I'm trying to get started with my model. All that being said, another issue with the layouts is cross-training. So when I am an analyst who gets an Excel model from someone, it takes me quite a bit of time to go through that Excel model and start to learn what's happening in the model. Because first I have to figure out the layout that whoever built that estimate put together, and then I have to go and start to dissect what data elements are, what's the buy quantity, how many per year, that kind of thing. In ACE, a trained ACE person, we can pick up an estimate a little bit faster and almost immediately start making progress in it, because there are certain things that have to be in certain places, so I can find things more quickly. And I think that's a really main point that folks kind of they tend to gloss over, but that's a really important piece. Let's talk a little bit about WBS Roll-up. A lot of times when we do the rehost, this is where errors come in. Okay, in Excel, when the way that you have to set up the spreadsheet with the work breakdown structure, you have to put in equations at the parent level to sum up the lowest children. And anytime you add a WBS element into your work breakdown structure, you've got to redo all those the parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, they all have to be updated in order to make sure that the new row that you're adding is summing through the WBS properly. In ACE, we get around that problem because what we do is we use the indenture structure. So how many rows if you look at the WBS CES description column in the image here on the right, you'll see the elements are indented. And in ACE, we don't put an equation on the parent level rows. The parent is always the sum of the children rows. So when you insert a new child, the parent will automatically sum that up. So you don't have to worry about having a sum equation that's not quite right in your estimate. So that's something very simple, but yet can cause a lot of problems in your estimate. Okay, inflation calculations. In my example, I have one worksheet where I have the inflation tables that I'm using with all of the different appropriations in it, and I have the weighted and the raw inflation so that I can do base year to base year conversions or base year to then year conversions anywhere in the spreadsheet. And what I do is I use, and I think this is a very common technique, I use a VLOOKUP equation. You can see that in the formula bar in the Excel image. Anytime I need to go and take a cost and inflate the value from whatever its source base year is to the base year of my estimate, I have to go and grab that factor. And I use this VLOOKUP equation to do that. Very easy to have one of these things just pointing in just the wrong place, or have it be pointing to the raw factor instead of the weighted factor. So you have to be careful about those sorts of things. With ACE, because of the appropriation, the fiscal year, and the units column that we have set up in ACE, you don't have to worry about writing the equation for inflation. That happens by virtue of putting in the appropriation, the fiscal year, and units. And what ACE does is it has the table in its database, and it will pull out the appropriate factor that I need to do base year or then year reports without me having to give it any more direction other than this is the source and this is the parameters that go along with that source. So that makes it a lot easier to keep track of that. And then next year when the table gets updated, we just simply load the new inflation tables, and we don't have to worry about rehooking up any of those VLOOKUP equations. Okay, so the next set of things to compare here is the basic estimate calculations. So here I'm talking about setting up inputs, equations, and throughputs in the model. And there's many different kinds of inputs that we work with. They can be a constant data input like a labor rate or a unit price. They can be non-cost constant data elements like the weight or the number of software lines of code. They can be time-phased data, so they could be FTEs per year or labor hours per year. They can be costs per year. And we also can have schedule inputs, start dates, finish dates, durations of that nature. And then we can take all those inputs and utilize those in equations. And the equations can be engineering build-up equations, factor equations, or parametric CERs. So the key here is to have a consistent approach in the inputs, equations, and the throughputs, because it really is necessary to be consistent in order for your estimate to be reviewed and defendable. And we utilize the same standard process for all of these consistently throughout the model. So if you look at just the estimate inputs, now in my Excel example here, I was very particular about the layout for this Excel sheet. I have the WBS number up top. I have a small description. I have a place for the appropriation. I have a section where I've calculated the time-phased results for the row. I've documented all the cost assumptions and the methods that I've used. I have a series of inputs, both the source and then those that get properly inflated to the base year of the ACE session. I try to articulate the factors that are used so that those can be seen properly. And then down at the bottom, I'm actually doing the phasing calculation there. And I use the same format across all of the inputs that I'm using in this particular model. Very detailed in terms of it has all the information there, but very, very difficult to keep copying that across and making sure that when I make an update that I update it in all the places that things need to get updated in. In ACE, we've tried to make that consistently, but all of this happens on one row of the estimate. So when when I look at my row, it has all of the parameters. If it's a cost, it will have its fiscal year in units and the appropriation along with it. I can add definitions to the row so that I can document the row properly. And then when I calculate the session, if I'm missing any pieces of information, there's a syntax check that will run that will tell me that I'm missing something, and I'll get a message in the error log that will kind of give me some guidance about what to do. So I think that hopefully you can see the differences there of these two in these two tools. Let's talk a little bit about schedules. This is an area when I started to do the comparison that I was a little surprised at about what happened. Project schedules, first of all, the main focus of producing a cost estimate is really to help identify the program budget. And the budget must be time-phased across the government fiscal years. And in order to produce a time-phase estimate, I really need some notion of a program schedule in order to do that. And really what I also want to make sure that I'm able to accommodate is if I want to understand if the schedule changes, particularly if it slips, how that is going to affect the cost of the project. When I'm working with these schedules, there's a couple of basic elements that I want to make sure that I need to keep track of: the start date for these activities, the duration, so how long is the activity going to occur, and then the finish date, which I can calculate from the start date plus the duration. And then as much as possible, I want to strive to build some logic into the model. So I'm actually, in by logic, I mean the start date plus the duration equals the finish date, and then one activity can't start until another is finished, or these two activities need to occur across the same time. So any of the math that I need to do to make that happen, I want to make sure that I build that into the model, because that's what is going to help me later on be able to do what-if drills with my model. And what I found was that you can, first of all, you can get a significant cost change from just these schedule changes. But I also found, and more importantly, that the different tools have different approaches to calculating the schedule dates, and you end up with different results. And in the example that I did, the schedule ends up being about a month off, and let me explain why. In the Excel file, the most common functions to use for schedule logic are the days 360 per year and the eDate function, and those produce what I'll call approximations to a schedule. ACE actually has a full calendar in it, so when you calculate schedule logic, and I've got an example of the equation that we use here, the date add function, you actually get a calendar result. And if you go and look at just a small section of my work breakdown structure, so these 3 rows here are from the software development section of the estimate. I've got 3 different CSCIs that I'm looking at, and the schedule happens over a period of 30 months. When you go and look at calculating with Excel using the days 360 and eDate versus the calculation in ACE using the date add, I end up with the Excel schedule being 25 days shorter than the ACE section. And that might not seem like a lot to you, but if you take that on a much larger estimate and then you start to ripple that to other portions of the estimate, I think your 25 days can very quickly start to add up and be a longer time period. And further, if you end up having an element where the cost is dependent on the time, so what we call a time-dependent cost item, then you're not only are you off on the schedule, but now you're also off on the cost as well. So we need to be aware of and careful of those kinds of things. Okay, so that's schedule. That takes me to the next section, section 3, where I look at cost estimating problems. Here, if you go back to my original analogy about the typewriter and the word processor, this complex estimating section is kind of like the automated section numbering or creating the cross-references that you have going on in the report that the word processor provides for you. So these are all of the automated functions, the schedule logic, the learning curves, and the other specialized functions. And over the years, in our ACE development team, we've actually added a lot of features to automate these kinds of functions. If you have any questions about utilizing any of these functions, or you have a particular scenario that you're trying to estimate in ACE, please call the help desk and we can point you to some resources that we've built, white papers and examples that can help you learn how to utilize those features. So I have the ACEIT support at techlodi.com email up on the screen. All of our users are welcome to use that at any time, and we can help you out and point you in the right direction to learn some of these more advanced features and hopefully save you some time in the process. From this section, I'm going to talk about learning curves. So I don't know if you've ever tried to implement a time phase learning curve in a spreadsheet before, but honestly, when I did this particular comparison, this was the hardest thing to try and implement in the Excel model. And the reason being is usually the approach that I ended up having to use is calculating. I needed to calculate an annual learning factor and then apply that to the T1 of the learning curve, and then the units, the annual units that we were going to be procuring each year of the program. And to do that, I had to build a Excel function to do that. And if you look at the very bottom of the page here, I know it's a little small because I'm trying to show multiple things here. You can get this Excel file and look at it more at your leisure. But the equation that's in the last two rows, rows 56 and 57, is the nested if equation that is on the learning curve factor rows. That helps figure out what the learning curve factor should be each year so that I can apply that based on the T1 and the learning slope. And this little nested if equation is a bugger to keep, make sure that it doesn't have an error in it. And this is the simple learning curve. I don't have a rate-adjusted learning curve in there. I'm not sharing that same learning curve across multiple WBS elements, and I'm not doing any broken learning in that either. So that is a complicated little set of things in order to be able to get this time-phased cost across my production schedule. Conversely, in ACE, we have a learning curve feature built into the tool. What we do is we allow you in the equation throughput section here, you put in the data that you have. So if you have the cost of a particular unit, if you have the cumulative average cost for several units, if you have the lot total cost, you can put that in the equation throughput column. You use the reference cost that's at the bottom of this little input all form here to specify what type of cost you were entering, and then ACE can calculate the T1 automatically for you. So in the Excel process, I would have had to have done that ahead of time. Here, I can take the source data that I have, and ACE will help generate that T1 for me. Then from there, I can tell ACE the theory, the prior quantity, the by quantity, and the slope, and it will go then and calculate for me out the cost of the time phase cost for the schedule of by quantity that I'm looking at. And I can easily apply rate-adjusted learning, broken learning, and shared learning just by filling out these extra fields here. So really, ACE is going to focus your attention on what the learning inputs should be and not the curve mechanics, which is what was such a problem in the spreadsheet. So that's the learning curves. Let's talk a little bit about fielded schedules. So fielding schedules are really important if you're looking at O&S analysis, and particularly when you're looking at alternative production buy schedules for the program, and you want to see what happens if I change the production quantity. When does that mean the units are going to be fielded? Sometimes people will put a lag in, so there's a lag between the first year that there's production quantities and then the first year that they're fielded. And then also the unit's going to be out in the field for a particular number of years. We usually call that the operational life as well. So those are a couple of the main parameters that we're talking about when we're looking at fielded schedules. Calculating a fielded schedule in ACE, in the spreadsheet, and having the equations account for changes in the production start year, changes in the quantities per year, changes in the operational life, so how many years the unit's going to be out in the field, and then changes in that lag. I fiddled with a couple of different things, and ultimately I did what I think most people do, which is they decide that I can't have an automated way of calculating my fielding schedule and account for all these different elements. So what I've done in the spreadsheet here is I am manually entering in the production quantity and then what the fielding quantity is. So now I have to rely on the model runner to make sure that their production and quantity or by quantity schedule is consistent with the fielded schedule. Okay, in ACE, we have a function for that. It's the op fielded units function. It takes 3 parameters, the by quantity, the op life, and the lag. And what it does is it calculates out for you that ramp up and ramp down of the by quantity across all the operational units. And so if you change any one of those parameters when you're doing what-if drills, the model will automatically recalculate that for you. Huge benefit for what-if drills. Okay. Section 4 is about adding WBS elements to the estimate. So, you know, most of the estimates that we work on, they tend to be things that are around for quite some time. They evolve as the program goes through the acquisition process, and as the program goes through the life cycle. And more often than not, we are faced with a situation at some point during the life of the estimate of having to add WBS elements to the estimate. And in a spreadsheet, that's not particularly easy. It usually requires a lot of steps, and it also usually requires a lot of repeating and copying and pasting to multiple parts of the worksheet, or the different worksheets throughout the workbook. So in ACE, we've actually, if you go back to the WBS roll-up section that I talked about earlier, the ACE is actually designed to be able to mitigate this problem from the get-go, because we know that this is what's going to happen to your estimate. And I'm just going to take a minute here to explain a little bit of the scenario of the of adding a work breakdown structure element to the example that I worked up for this particular study. So the scenario here is I had my estimate, and I decided to add to procurement two rows. Well, I have a parent row for software, and then I have two rows, one for software site activation and one for software upgrade. And so I went about the steps to start to add those two rows into my Excel workbook. And then I started documenting that process. And it turns out it took me 6 detailed slides of explaining step by step what needed to be done to each section. And then all the copying and pasting that needed to happen between different spreadsheets within the workbook. Tedious process. I made a mistake in one place. I had to go back and fix it. And I didn't notice it until a little bit later on. So the point there is very easy when you're adding these rows to make mistakes. If you go into the ACE process kind of cut it actually a little bit more than in half, because the last slide here on the ACE is showing a lot of the graphics and things that we get out of to be able to also see compare the result before and after adding the new row. But the ACE process is a little bit more straightforward. You're going to add the WBS elements, so you're just inserting a row into the session. For those two rows, I added in the inputs that needed to support them. I developed the equation for them, and then I calculated, and that added the cost for those elements into the session. And then I'm able to quickly go and look at the input results viewer and see the base year and the then year results for adding that case, and then I can run a series of standard reports and custom charts in order to be able to exemplify and explain to somebody else what this addition added. So that's I think that's one of the main benefits of utilizing ACE, is to be able to do that, to have your ACE session be able to quickly accommodate changes in your model. Section 5 is on what-if drills. What-if drills, provide an opportunity to start to truly analyze and understand the program. And decision makers really, they're always looking, for ways that they might be able to save money or achieve a better schedule or deal with a budget constraint. So they have, some questions that they're trying to get answers to, and I have those up here on the screen. So the analyst really needs to provide, first they need to provide an estimate, to be able to give a point estimate. But then in order to be able to do these what-if drills, they need to be able to really have a model that can calculate out these different alternatives or scenarios. So what I tend to say is, spreadsheets, they really provide an estimate solution. And then ACE is providing both an estimate solution and a modeling solution. If you try and do these kinds of things in the spreadsheet, most of the time what I see people end up doing is they make multiple copies of the workbook, and they model the different scenarios with copies of the workbook, and they've got to keep track of all those different workbooks that they've created, and comparing cases then side by side then becomes linking workbooks together, which is a little bit cumbersome, and those links between files can start to break down. In ACE, we've actually built this into the tool. Cases in ACE has been part of the tool for quite a long time. You can conduct an unlimited number of what-if drills right within the same model. They're all stored in the same file. If you look on the left of the diagram here, you can see that this particular scenario has about 7 different cases in it at this point, the baseline, and then 6 different alternatives. I use this, we have this input results viewer, and it's really designed to help you manage what-if drills. You can look at the cases in different views. You can look at it in base year dollars, then year dollars. You can look at it with risk results. You can look at it in net present value if you'd like. And then you can also look at it in different modes where you can either compare the totals for cases, you can compare the time phase results for the cases, you can compare one different WBS element as well. So you really get that true side-by-side comparison of the different cases that you're trying to look at in your project. This slide here just gives an example of how you do overrides. So when you create a different case, you're overriding the methodology that is in the equation throughput that's in the main screen for ACE. So here, any place where you see a blue or bold text, that is where the default input has been overridden for this particular case. And you can do that both for total elements and time-phased elements. And this just gives an example of what those cases look like side by side. And then you can take those tabular results and then turn them into graphics, which you can put in front of your decision maker. And if something changes in the ACE model, like you add a new WBS element, the chart is, you can regenerate the chart in a very short amount of time and be able to update the charts for your PowerPoint briefing very quickly. So I went through those 5 main sections. What I didn't, there's more to the story. The rest of the story is there's a whole boatload of additional features that ACE has to help with different parts of the estimating process that you're not getting easily with a spreadsheet. Certainly uncertainty is one of them. Documentation is built within the tool, so you can actually document where the sources of your data came, and that gets stored within the file. You can change the session properties, so if you want to change the base year, the units, you change the number of fiscal years, the inflation tables. That happens easily in ACE, and those things are very difficult in the spreadsheet. Phasing methods, allowing you to have, phasing methods are basically things where you can take a total and spread it in different ways. So I can level load something or spread it over time with a beta curve and things like that. So there's several different additional items that you can look at, and I've explored some of these in the larger presentation. So in conclusion, the cost analysts, they've got to perform a lot of activities in order to give a credible point estimate. They've got to develop a model by estimating each of the lowest children WBS elements, and they've got to come up with the best method for each of those. They've got to come up with a set of ground rules and assumptions that best addresses their scenario, and they need to keep those consistent throughout the project. They've got to produce a program result that's in constant and base year or budget dollars and constant dollars. They've got a time phase their program based on their program schedule, and then they might have to deal with adding WBS elements to their estimate as the project evolves. And hopefully you've seen that some of those things are very difficult to do in a spreadsheet, and in ACE we've got efficiencies in there in place to do that. And agencies like the Army, the Air Force, DHS, FAA, Australia DoD, they're using ACE as their standard tool because they want to have all those features and have that consistency in their model. Finally, I'll leave you with this. There is the larger brief that this is the executive summary of. It's actually a package of things. There's a full PowerPoint presentation. It's about 80 slides long. It's meant for you to print it out and then when you're going through and looking at the spreadsheet, which is the second file here, and the ACE model, the third one, to have both of those up on your screen and walk through that slide deck so that you can really examine some of the differences in those the two tools. And that brief is available on our website at ACEIT.com. And if you go to the public resources, if you go to the resource library, and you scroll down to the white paper section, you will see those files there. It's the ACE versus spreadsheet summary, and then the challenges with using spreadsheets for cost analysis, both of those. That is what I have to share with you today. If there are questions, I'm very happy to take those.
Sorry, I muted myself. Well, it looks to me, Melissa, that you did such a good job that everybody felt their questions were answered.
Okay, so I stunned them to silence, I see, yes.
Yeah. You guys all have Melissa's contact info if you come up with something between now and then.
Anytime. They're welcome to email me. And then I will be at the conference next week, so if people have questions and they'd like to come up to the booth, I will be at the booth as much as I can during the time of the conference. So hopefully they'll be able to catch up with me then.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody again for joining us today. Thanks to Melissa. And I hope you guys all have a fantastic rest of your Wednesday.
All right. Thank you very much,
Megan. Bye-bye.